Clemson football's offensive coordinator, Garrett Riley, was surprised by the team who presented to him the Broyles Award trophy that he was awarded after he led TCU's offense in 2022 to an extremely successful campaign. The Texas Christian Horned Frogs went 13-2, played for a national championship, and the offense was the reason for that. Max Duggan, Keandre Miller, Quentin Johnson, many different faces on that offense that Garrett Riley coached and developed. A lot of them, of course, were remaining players from Gary Patterson and the previous regime at TCU, but Garrett Riley was a part of Sonny Dykes' staff that brought TCU from a program that failed to achieve a bowl appearance in 2021 to a team that won a semifinal game in the college football playoff against the Michigan Wolverines, who were a top 3, top 2 team last year in college football, and they played for a national championship and played for a Big 12 championship. They split against Kansas State, beating them in the regular season, losing in the Big 12 championship game. I added that just for context for Garrett Riley and why he won the Broyles Award, to remind everyone, because when your team loses 7-65 in the national title, people can very quickly forget everything else you achieved, and wrongfully so. That was a mismatch from the beginning, and TCU used all of their strength, and they used the mulligan against Michigan. They had nothing against Georgia. Nothing. And no one probably would have beaten Georgia that night. But to get to the point of this video, I'm talking about Garrett Riley and more specifically Clemson football. And seeing Garrett Riley be presented with the Broyles Award trophy by his team got me thinking a few things. It really got me thinking, because Clemson football has underachieved according to modern Clemson Dabo Swinney standards over the past 2 seasons. 2021 Clemson and 2022 Clemson were a laughingstock for different reasons. 2022 Clemson was constantly placed inside of the top 4, top 5, top 6 throughout the year, and when you watched them play, you knew that they probably weren't even a top 10 team. They were that bad despite being undefeated. And by that bad, I don't mean a bad football team. I mean bad for their ranking, bad for their undefeated record, so on and so forth. I mean, you watched that game versus Syracuse, and that game casted doubt on the ACC in its whole. Make no mistake about it, Clemson's best win of this past season was that Florida State game, where they dominated a Florida State team that ended up going 10-3. It was their best game. On the other hand, 2021 Clemson was a joke because of how the season started and just because of the massive failure in expectations all around. They very early were out of the playoff picture, losing to Georgia early in the year, and then, of course, losing to North Carolina State and Devin Leary, 2021 Devin Leary, on September 25th. So Clemson was already out of the playoff picture in 2021 by September. It took a little longer in 2022. The offense slightly improved in 2022, but that was sort of evened out by the defense because of Brent Venables' departure and some key players leaving after 2021. The defense took a step back as well. So Clemson has underperformed, make no mistake about it, over the past 2 seasons. And what I want to talk about is if they can get back. And by get back, I mean get back to the playoff and get back to winning the ACC in impressive fashion, not beating a worn-down, washed, Mac Brown-led North Carolina team in the ACC title. I mean dominating the regular season, dominating the ACC championship game, and finishing in the top 10. Can they at least get there? And then beyond that, of course, what Clemson and Dabo Swinney and the fan base want ultimately is to get back to the national championship. get back to winning and competing for national championships. That's the goal here. And we didn't know if Clemson was even going to be capable of reaching the playoff because seeing how Dabo Swinney liked to promote from within, it was just Brandon Streeter's first year as offensive coordinator. No one really knew if the change was going to be made. And Brandon Streeter had been with the program for a while, heavily involved with recruiting. Coach Trevor Lawrence was the offensive coordinator, obviously in 2022, was the passing game coordinator prior to that, very integral to the Clemson team. He was canned after 1 year as offensive coordinator, not even demoted, just straight up canned. And Garrett Riley was brought in. Garrett Riley being brought in to replace him as the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach at Clemson. And now here we are. Dabo made the staff change that everyone wanted him to make. He upgraded the staff. Recruiting, while not being at the level of Alabama and Georgia, has still been great. And now we get to see Clemson again in 2023. And will they meet the expectation? Will they underperform? Will they overperform? And overperforming, if you're Clemson, with the reputation that you've had, you might think is kind of hard. But I think for the first time in a while, there's a very realistic chance that Clemson could start this season ranked outside of the top 10. In many way too early top 25s. Many winter top 25s. Some people are releasing spring top 25s before the spring games have concluded, which I'm going to only release a spring top 25 after all the spring games are over, but that's just me. A lot of those polls, and a lot of the analysts writing them, and even just a lot of fans, whether knowledgeable or casuals, have Clemson outside of the top 10. And almost no one that I know of or that I have read has Clemson inside the top 4, top 5, top 6. They're viewed now, they're no longer viewed as king of the hill or even at the ice peak of the mountain or the volcano that is the college football playoff. They're close. They're well respected. But the 10-3 campaign of 2021 and the 11-3 campaign of 2022, which had such a sour ending, losing to Tennessee, losing to South Carolina, losing to Notre Dame. I mean, Clemson entering that Notre Dame game was 8-0, and they went 3-3. Yes, they went 3-3 from their November to December games. They went 3-3 after starting out 8-0, and they played their toughest opponents: Notre Dame, Tennessee, South Carolina. All of those teams finished ranked. No other team they played finished ranked. None. All the ranked teams, the teams that were ranked at the end of the season, all the teams that were ranked at the end of the season that Clemson played, they lost to. And in 2021, Georgia was ranked at the end of the year. That was possibly their best game of the year. Pitt was, Georgia was, NC State was. Now, they did beat Wake Forest, who was ranked at the end of the year. I'll give them that, but still 1-3 against teams that finished ranked at the end of the season in 2021. So can Clemson even beat teams that are all around good? Or do they just feast on the above average, average, below average, bad, and awful teams that mostly plague the ACC? So can they beat a good team? Can they beat a great team? And where it starts is mainly on offense. It mainly starts with the side of the ball that Garrett Riley is commanding and Cade Klubnik. Cade Klubnik in quarterback for Clemson is the biggest boomer bust area for the entire team. Now, biggest question mark, I'd say those would be elsewhere. This isn't like, let's just make a comparison. This isn't like Penn State, where it looks like quarterback is probably going to be the position on the field with the least amount of depth and where you're having the least experience, which means that Penn State's quarterback room and their quarterback Drew Aller, that's their biggest question mark for the whole season. Cade Klubnik has had more playing time as compared to Drew Aller, and Clemson has bigger holes and a greater lack of depth in other areas on the team, notably at wide receiver and offensive line. Clemson, actually similarly to the comparison in Penn State, is strong at running back and strong on defense. They lost plenty, and by plenty I don't mean like 10 players, but they lost plenty of great players on their team. Trenton Simpson at linebacker, KJ Henry, Brian Breesy, Miles Murphy on the defensive line. Only 4 players, 4 starters that they lost on defense. But all of them very talented players, and the 4 of them were amongst the better players on the Clemson defense. Clemson lost 3 players to graduation or the NFL draft on offense. Joseph Ngata, Jordan McFadden, Davis Allen. They did lose DJ Uiagalelei, obviously, to Oregon State, which I think is a match made in heaven. I think Jonathan Smith will do wonders with DJ Uiagalelei, who unfortunately was more of a product of Brandon Streeter than Dabo Swinney. Brandon Streeter, make no mistake about it, ruined DJ Uiagalelei, and maybe DJ wasn't the 5-star, 4-star talent that everyone thought he was, but I still think he has that potential, and I think that he will improve probably by quite a bit in Jonathan Smith's system at Oregon State, if indeed he does start, which I think is very likely. But I think you get an upgrade in Cade Klubnik. There's a very good chance that quarterback could become a strength of this team alongside of running back and on defense. Very good chance of that. Garrett Riley obviously coached Max Duggan. Max Duggan went to New York as a Heisman Trophy candidate, and at the time, before he played in the playoff, I thought that he should have won it. And then I watched Caleb Williams carry USC on his back and still lose in what was an impressive performance against Tulane. And I watched Max Duggan, while he did above average against Michigan, he did absolutely horribly against Georgia. Part of that's on his supporting cast. And against Michigan, he didn't even complete 50% of his passes, and he did make some critical mistakes in that game, as did his opposing counterpart in the Fiesta Bowl, J.J. McCarthy. Cade Klubnik, going back to him, threw for 697 yards in 2022. 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He had a 57.1 QBR. He had a 120.1 passer rating, got sacked 6 times, completed 61% of his passes. He also had 139 rushing yards on the ground, averaged 3.3 yards per carry, and he had 2 rushing touchdowns. His long rush was of 16. His best game by a mile was against UNC, where he went 20 of 24 for 279 yards, a touchdown, 30 yards rushing with another touchdown there. He had a 194.7 rating and a 94.5 QBR. But North Carolina had no defense, and against a Tennessee team that, look, let's face it, Tennessee doesn't have a great defense either. They had one of the worst secondaries, if not possibly the worst secondary in college football. Just look what Spencer Rattler did to them. Cade Klubnik went 30 of 54 for 320 yards, completed 55.6% of his passes, no touchdown passes, 2 interceptions. He had a 97.9 passer rating and a 49.1 QBR. He had 51 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown there. They waited too long to put Cade Klubnik in the place of DJ Uiagalelei, and there is an argument to be had that if they did put him in instead of Uiagalelei earlier in the year, maybe Clemson could have reached the playoff, or maybe they could have gotten an extra win or so. But the team, and this is where I want to get to another point of mine before we talk about the questions that I have listed and why I have that opinion, the Tigers' depth is questionable because they don't use the portal. Meanwhile, the portal has made it so that more Clemson players are leaving now more than ever, and no one's filling the holes. The only incoming transfer for Clemson is graduate transfer Paul Tyson, who is like the 3rd stringer at Alabama and only played there because he was related to Bear Bryant. Then he transferred to Arizona State and did little there. He's probably transferring to Clemson so he can get into coaching and become a graduate assistant there is probably what Paul Tyson is doing, and that's why he's transferring into Clemson. And also because from what I know, they're a pretty decent, if not good, great academic school. But here we are. And if Cade Klubnik started for the entirety of 2022, let's say Clemson makes the playoff instead of Ohio State. Instead of an entertaining Peach Bowl, a very entertaining Peach Bowl where you didn't know who was going to win until Noah Ruggles missed the field goal. You didn't know who the victor was until the last 2 seconds of the game. Georgia would have destroyed Clemson by 20 to 30 points, if not potentially more. Because Clemson, let's be honest here, they have great starters. They have starters that I think, if they're developed right, could match up with anyone in the nation. As SG1 Sports put it in his video of teams who he thinks can win the college football playoff. But outside of their starters, they have no depth. No depth whatsoever. They have the most depth. It would be them or Florida State who have the most depth in the ACC. But you put Clemson in the Big Ten or the SEC, they'd probably be fourth, dare I say it, maybe even fifth in terms of team depth. They don't have any stacked rooms or stacked cores of any kind outside of maybe running back because of Will Shipley, because not Shipley, even though whatever. Will Shipley, Phil Maffa, that would be probably the most stacked room in the entire Clemson Tigers football program, in my opinion. 2 great running backs. Will Shipley being someone who was a 5-star at a high school, could be a Heisman Trophy candidate, especially if the offensive line, who returns a lot of its production, if they can improve. But the wide receiver core, plenty of questions around there. Bo Collins, Antonio Williams, Adam Randall. I look at them in that wide receiver room. There's no one who's going to step up. And if there is, it's very unlikely. And the offensive line has historically, from a recruiting standpoint and a developmental standpoint, been one of Clemson's weaknesses as compared to, let's say, quarterback, which has historically been one of their strengths in the Dabo Swinney era. So that's just some of the background, in my opinion, where they're strong at, where they're weak at. I have Clemson, this is actually a sneak preview of my spring top 25, though it is subject to change until all the spring games are concluded, so this might change. Clemson I currently have as 15th in my current spring top 25, again subject to change. And when it comes to team potential, I think that Clemson is just outside the top 10. I have them inside the top 15 for total team talent. So they're a top 15 team. I think that that's pretty clear. They're top 15. The worst they could be, I think, is top 25 with, maybe they go 10-3 again like they did in 2021. The best they could be, and this is where we get into expectations, they could win the national title. It's very unlikely, but I think it can be done, mainly because of coaching. Because Dabo Swinney has been there before, he's beat Nick Saban twice, won 2 national titles, and Garrett Riley brought, according to 24/7 Sports Team Talent Composite Index, outside of Cincinnati, they brought the least talented team in the college football playoff to the national championship. Michigan State, Cincinnati, those are teams that are relatively of similar comparable talent to 2022 TCU, got destroyed in their semifinal games, and TCU won theirs. So they have great coaches. They have high-achieving coaches, and they are recruiting at a high level. They're recruiting consistently top 15, top 10 classes. They even had a top 5 class a few years ago. But what should Clemson's expectations be? I think it's pretty simple. Just because you've underachieved for the past 2 seasons does not mean that is the new norm. If that's the case, then Ohio State fans should no longer expect to beat Michigan or to reach the national championship or play for a Big Ten championship, which would be asinine with a capital A. The expectations should be an ACC title and a college football playoff berth, which that would at minimum mean that Clemson has a 12-2 record with a championship, which would be an improvement. The minimum expectation should be an improvement record-wise and postseason appearance or achievement-wise compared to 2022, which would be a 12-2 record and appearing in the college football playoff and losing. That'd be the minimum expectation. And maybe that'd be 13-1 if they can go undefeated in the regular season, but they have a game against Notre Dame at home, a game against North Carolina at home, and the ACC, while very weak, Clemson, if you put them in the Big Ten or the SEC, or heck, dare I say it, even the Pac-12, I don't think they would be the number 1 or even number 2 team. The ACC's that weak. And Clemson, by comparison of top 10 teams, I think is pretty weak in comparison to a lot of them. Maybe there's yelling and screaming in response to that, but look, 1-6 against teams that finished in the final polls of the 2021 and 2022 season. The expectations shouldn't change, but the perception of the program maybe should. Though Garrett Riley being brought in kind of rebuilt my perception of the Clemson program. I thought that this team wouldn't even be a top 20 team if Brandon Streeter wasn't fired. Brandon Streeter being fired and Garrett Riley being brought in bumps this team up several spots in a power index, in a top 25 poll, and it gives them a shot to win the national title. If you have Brandon Streeter as your offensive coordinator, with this team, nothing else changes, I don't even think you're reaching the college football playoff. You won't. But with Garrett Riley, that's a game changer. That's an absolute game changer. Clemson, because of Garrett Riley, automatically, I think, has one of the best offensive staffs in the country. That's not only shows how important your coordinator is to that whole side of the football, but it also shows how good of a coordinator that Garrett Riley is. I don't think that this team will win the national title. In fact, as you can probably tell with where I have them ranked when I view things by talent, pure talent, versus when I view things by their record, strength of record, I don't have Clemson reaching the national championship game. I don't even have them reaching the college football playoff. In fact, depending on if they win the ACC or not, which I haven't even decided yet, in fact, I'm kind of leaning toward Florida State, but because, again, you still have time. It is the spring. It's not the fall yet. You don't have to have everything figured out. I'd rather have my preseason predictions figured out later, but have a lot of evidence behind them, a lot of research, and a likelihood that they'll be proven correct, than release the earliest opinions and have them all be wrong. But that's just me. I think that Clemson will play in the ACC championship game. They will be, at minimum, what they were last year in the sense of how good they are overall. I think offensive improvement is a guarantee. The biggest question, of course, is defense. Brent Venables will now have been gone for 2 years. We'll see what Wes Goodwin and Mickey Kahn are truly made of. And losing the 4 people on the defense, especially Brian Breesy and other players on the defensive side of the ball, that front 7 is going to be tested. It will. And with their weak schedule, they don't have any tough non-conference opponents outside of Notre Dame, and that's a home game, and they have a really easy and favorable ACC schedule. Clemson, if they lose one regular season game, assuming they start outside of the top 10 in both polls, that might be all it takes to knock them out of the playoff conversation. Because if you have a weak strength of schedule and you don't start high in the polls, and we all know how that goes. We all know how that goes, especially if the loss is later in the year to, let's say, Notre Dame again, or they get upset at home by North Carolina, or even on the road against South Carolina. So we'll see. But those are the expectations for Clemson, I think, as they should be. This team has a lot of potential. Believe me, they're one of the 10 teams that I think can win a national championship, that being along with Texas, Wisconsin, Penn State, Washington, Utah, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, and Michigan. Clemson is among those teams. Those are the 10 teams, including Clemson, who I think have more than a hair's of a chance to win the national championship. So they're among that category when it comes to their ceiling and potential. Make sure to watch the next video that's on the recommended page. Comment your thoughts down below. Subscribe to the channel whether you're a Clemson fan or not. This is one of the most unbiased channels that you can find when it comes to college football. Like this video, hit the notification bell so you can get notified when I post new content. And thank you for watching and engaging. See you guys later.